I knew something was off the second I saw HOA board president Elora Kensington's Subaru parked halfway on my ranch's private gravel road. Nobody comes down that way unless they're lost or planning something stupid. I'm Parker Judd. I inherited my lakefront ranch from my father, who dug that lake with his own hands 40 years ago. Our HOA, Oak Ridge Preserve, covers the surrounding neighborhood, but my ranch and lake have always been privately owned. It's written in the original zoning documents, the property deeds, even the old developer's notes. Everyone knows it, or at least they used to. Elora, I said as I stepped out of my truck, you're about 500 feet past the HOA boundary line. She turned around in her floral blouse and oversized sunglasses like she owned the place. One hand on her hip, the other holding a clipboard like it was a royal decree. Good morning, Parker. I'm just here doing a little property inspection. Of my land. I raised an eyebrow. This isn't HOA property. Well, funny thing, she said, flipping her clipboard around. Turns out your lake is now considered a shared community water feature. We had a vote last week. I nearly laughed. You what? We voted it in. Retroactively. Majority ruled. You don't get to vote away someone's private lake. She pursed her lips. Parker, you've been very difficult at meetings lately. Maybe if you participated more, you'd understand the importance of community spirit. That's when I noticed a rusted old pontoon boat docked on my shoreline, and a teenager, shirtless and sunburned, trying to paddle it with a rake. Who's that? I demanded. Oh, that's my son, Ryan, Elora said casually. He's just breaking in the lake. I gave him permission. You gave him. I stopped myself. Elora, you're trespassing, and your kid is about 2 minutes away from a lawsuit. She blinked like I just insulted her casserole. Excuse me? You and your clipboard are about to walk back onto HOA land before I call the sheriff. Her sunglasses came off. You wouldn't dare. I'll call the police first. You're threatening a board member. Call them, I said, pulling my phone out. Let's see what they say when I show them the property lines. She stormed off, huffing something about ungrateful ranchers. Ryan stayed on the boat, drifting sideways into a patch of algae. By the time the deputies rolled up, Elora was already crying like she'd been mugged, claimed I shoved her, threatened her, and tried to drown her son. I calmly handed the officer a copy of the original survey, the deed, and a time-stamped picture of her car parked on my land. The cop turned to her. Ma'am, this lake's clearly private property. But we voted, she shrieked. You can't vote away someone's land. That's not how anything works. She turned beet red. I want him fined, suspended from the HOA. The officer raised an eyebrow. You can't suspend someone from their own property. Elora turned to me and hissed, You'll regret this. I kept my expression flat. She had no idea. Because what Elora didn't know, what nobody else on the board knew, was that I'd been elected treasurer of the HOA 6 months ago, and I had full control of their budget. Let's just say, things were about to get expensive. For her. 3 days after Elora's Little Lake invasion, I sat in the back corner of the Oak Ridge Preserve Community Center with a stack of budget reports the size of a hay bale. The monthly board meeting hadn't started yet, but I'd already spotted the glint of Elora's earrings as she flounced into the room, whispering to a few familiar faces her usual vote puppets. Her son Ryan wasn't with her, thankfully, probably grounded after drifting into cattails and getting stung by hornets. That part I enjoyed in silence. Marjorie Tills, the HOA secretary, clicked her pen and cleared her throat at the front table. Let's get started. Tonight's agenda includes the revised landscaping budget, water feature maintenance expansion, and a special motion from the president regarding community recreation access. That last part made Elora beam like she'd just been crowned queen of suburbia. I kept my mouth shut for now. She stood slowly like this was theater, not a meeting. I'd like to formally propose that the lake be officially designated as a shared recreational space for all Oak Ridge residents. We'll install canoe racks, a floating dock, and a small lifeguard station. I've already gathered signatures of support. I leaned forward. Did you gather those signatures before or after trespassing? Elora didn't even glance my way. This is a community improvement. We need to think beyond individual ownership. Think legacy. Councilman J. Kim, a retired engineer who usually kept to himself, raised an eyebrow. Who's paying for this legacy? She waved her hand dismissively. We'll reallocate funds from the Community Beautification Reserve. It's underused. That was my cue. Actually, I said, tapping the folder in front of me, beautification reserves are already earmarked for trail maintenance and sidewalk repairs per last quarter's vote. You were there, Elora. You seconded the motion. She blinked. Well, then we'll use the emergency fund. I flipped to the next page and handed a copy to Jay. The emergency fund's been frozen since February due to the pending audit I requested. You remember the audit, right? The one reviewing last year's unapproved expenditures. Elora's tone sharpened. You're derailing this with technicalities. No, I said. I'm safeguarding the HOA from illegal spending based on a fantasy claim over land we don't own. Marjorie looked up from her notes. Parker, do you have documentation on property boundaries? Already submitted to the county clerk. I also provided a copy to the HOA legal counsel last week when Elora's son took a joyride on my lake. I suggest you ask them what they found. I turned to the rest of the board. Spoiler alert, this isn't HOA land. Elora started speaking again, but this time, her voice cracked. We're moving on. Let's vote. No, said Jay, setting his papers down. We're not voting on something that could open the HOA up to a lawsuit. She turned to him, face flushed. You're not even on the recreation committee. And yet, he said, I can do basic math. The meeting ended with no vote and no applause. Elora stormed out before we even adjourned, and the rest of us were left in a kind of stunned silence. I packed up my things slowly, letting the others leave first. I wanted Elora alone. Outside, I found her standing by her car, fuming and pacing like a tea kettle that never got to whistle. Still think you can give away what doesn't belong to you? I asked. You think this is over? She snapped. You're just a glorified bookkeeper. Bookkeepers don't file criminal complaints, I replied. But treasurers with evidence of financial misconduct? We do. Her eyes narrowed. You wouldn't. Already did. The sheriff's office has a copy of the HOA's last 3 quarterly financial reports. I highlighted the entries that didn't match our vote records, like the $10,000 spent on consulting that went to a company registered under your sister's name. That shut her up. I'd suggest you lawyer up, I said, walking away. Oh, and tell Ryan to stay off my land. Next time, I won't be so generous. The next morning, a county sheriff's vehicle pulled up at Elora's house. I didn't even need to watch, I already knew what was happening. The HOA's lawyer had confirmed everything I submitted. Fraud, misuse of funds, conflict of interest. A full investigation was underway. Within a week, subpoenas were issued. The board had to release all financial documents, emails, and meeting notes. Elora's name appeared on nearly every questionable line item: consulting, landscaping contracts, even a community improvement bonus that somehow ended up in her personal account. While investigators dug deeper, the rest of the board scrambled. Jay reached out to me, asking for help drafting emergency bylaw revisions. Elora's allies resigned in a quiet string of emails. The HOA was bleeding leadership, and I was the only one with clean hands and a working knowledge of the books. By the end of the month, I was appointed interim president. I didn't celebrate, I hired a forensic accountant. The deeper we dug, the more rot we uncovered. Elora had been funneling funds through shell companies for over a year. She'd even tried to rezone parts of the neighborhood by bribing a low-level clerk at the county office. That's when the FBI stepped in because bribing a government official with HOA money turned this into federal territory. The new board voted unanimously to press charges. I didn't speak at the hearing. I didn't need to. The evidence spoke louder than I ever could. Elora was indicted on 3 counts of wire fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, and misuse of public funds. Her assets were frozen, her car was repossessed, and her house, well, turns out the mortgage was in her husband's name. He filed for divorce within the week. Ryan got expelled for fighting at school. Not my problem. But the best part? That lake, the one she tried to share, remained exactly where it always had. Quiet, untouched, mine. After the dust settled, the new board passed a motion cementing a buffer zone around all non-HOA properties. No more gray areas. No more shared anything. And as for me, I stepped down as president 6 months later. I didn't need the title. I'd already done what I came to do. I made sure no one would ever try to take what didn't belong to them again. By early autumn, the air had shifted. Leaves along the ridge turned amber, and the lake mirrored the sky like it always had, calm, undisturbed, mine. But the HOA wasn't done unraveling. The deeper the investigation reached, the more names surfaced, people I hadn't expected. And the worst part wasn't what they did with the money. It was what they tried to do with the land. One afternoon, while I was repairing a fence along the west pasture, a county planner named Dana Whitlock showed up in a county-issued sedan. She stepped out holding a manila envelope and wore a look that said, "I don't want to be here either." "You Parker Judd?" she asked. "Yeah." "Something wrong?" She handed me the envelope. "You ought to read that now." "I'll wait." I opened it right there in the dust. Inside was a petition filed months ago requesting a zoning variance that would reclassify my lakefront acreage from private agricultural to mixed-use recreational. Filed under the name Community Partnership Initiative. Attached were forged signatures from homeowners I knew personally. Some of them had already told me they'd never signed anything. I looked up. "This is fraud." Dana nodded. "I figured you'd say that. That's why I came in person. I've already flagged it with the county attorney." "Who submitted it?" "Technically, a nonprofit called Ridgeview Horizons. But the address listed is your HOA's former office suite. And the listed contact? Councilwoman Gentry. I'm guessing she's not just a friend of the HOA." I folded the papers carefully. "She's Elora Kensington's cousin." I thought so. 3 days later, the state attorney general's office issued a subpoena for Councilwoman Gentry's office records. That's when the real rot showed itself. Turns out, Ridgeview Horizons wasn't just a shell nonprofit. It was a funnel set up to receive grants from county development funds, then redirect that money through consulting contracts, kickbacks, and land grab schemes. The lake wasn't their only target. They'd already tried to reclassify 2 other properties in neighboring developments. Mine was just the largest. The news broke fast. Local reporters swarmed the HOA's old office, county hall, and even the farmer's market. I stayed out of it as much as I could, but one morning, I found a reporter waiting outside my ranch gate. "You're the guy who caught them, right?" he asked, jogging up as I unlocked the chain. "I just did my homework," I said. "They did the stealing." He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "They're saying you kept quiet for months." "I was building a case," I said. "You don't scream when you're hunting snakes. You wait until they're all out in the open." By the end of the week, Councilwoman Gentry resigned and lawyered up. Her phone records showed dozens of calls with Elora in the months leading up to the zoning petition. More damning, there were wire transfers from HOA funds to Ridgeview Horizons, masked as community development incentives. I received a formal request to testify at the grand jury hearing. I didn't hesitate. Inside the courtroom, the air was clinical and cold. The state prosecutor, a woman named Clarissa Mendoza, laid out each connection with brutal precision. I sat quiet until they called me up. "You were treasurer of the Oak Ridge Preserve HOA at the time the funds were transferred?" she asked. "Yes." "Did you approve the disbursements to Ridgeview Horizons?" "No." "Were those payments discussed or voted on by the board?" "Not once." She stepped closer. "Did you recognize the name Ridgeview Horizons before receiving the zoning petition from the county planner?" "I didn't. I looked it up after. Nothing about it was legitimate." "What did you do after realizing the petition contained forged signatures?" "I contacted every homeowner listed. All of them denied signing. I sent sworn affidavits to the county attorney within 48 hours. Each answer landed like a nail in a coffin. When it was over, I walked out of that courthouse and drove straight home. I didn't want to hear the reactions, didn't want to sit through the analysis. I just wanted to hear the wind through the cottonwoods again. But peace didn't last long. 2 weeks later, I received an envelope from the county assessor's office. Inside was a notice of reassessment. According to the new document, my property taxes had ballooned by over 60%. I drove straight down to the office next morning. The clerk, a guy named Ben, scanned the paper and frowned. "This reassessment wasn't generated by our regular schedule. Someone flagged your plot for potential commercial conversion. That triggers an immediate reassessment." "Flagged by who?" He tapped a few keys, then frowned deeper. "No name. That's weird. Usually it logs the initiating party." "Check the IP address," I said. He gave me a look, but did it anyway. After a pause, he glanced up. "This was submitted through an internal county account. One that's been inactive since last year. Let me guess. Councilwoman Gentry's." He didn't answer, but his silence was confirmation enough. I filed a formal appeal and requested a fraud investigation. With the AG already involved, it didn't take long. The reassessment was thrown out, the IP address traced, and another layer of corruption peeled back. Gentry had kept access to the county system long after her IT privileges were supposed to be revoked. The state added charges for digital tampering and attempted retaliation. At this point, the HOA barely existed. Only 3 board members remained, and all of them had voted to dissolve the current structure and bring in a professional management company. I didn't object. I even recommended a firm I trusted, one that dealt strictly with financial compliance and avoided land disputes like the plague. In the final board meeting before the transition, Marjorie, now acting secretary, handed me a thick folder. "This is everything we found in Elora's personal files. You should see it." I opened it that night. Inside were blueprints. Not lakefront improvement plans, no. These were designs for an entire private club. A boathouse, a concession stand, even tennis courts. All built around my lake. She'd planned to turn it into a members-only retreat, funded by HOA dues and county grants. Her son Ryan would be the youth coordinator. The whole thing was a fantasy except for one thing. She'd already made down payments to contractors using Ridgeview Horizon accounts. I boxed everything up and sent it to the AG's office. Elora eventually accepted a plea deal. 5 years probation, full restitution, and permanent ban from holding any position in a registered nonprofit, HOA, or municipal committee. Her name was scrubbed from the county rolls. She moved 2 counties over, tried to change her last name, but the press followed her. As for Councilwoman Gentry, she went to trial. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. Guilty on all counts. The county launched a full overhaul of its zoning and petition processes. No more backdoor submissions. No more community partnerships without verified contacts. I was asked to sit on the advisory panel. I declined. I'd done my part. Now, the lake remains exactly as it should be. No floating docks, no lifeguard stands. Just fish, wind, and the occasional heron stalking the shallows. Sometimes I think back to that day Elora stood on my gravel road with her clipboard, pretending to hand out favors she had no right to give. She thought paperwork and pressure would win. But some of us read the fine print. And some of us don't forget. The first frost hit early that year. You could see it clinging to the fence posts like ash, and the lake had that glassy stillness that made every sound echo twice. I'd been clearing brush near the north slope when a black SUV rolled up the ridge. No decals this time, just federal plates. 2 agents stepped out plain clothes, but the energy was unmistakable. One was tall and wiry, with a clipped tone and a folder tucked under his arm. The other, shorter, wore gloves despite the mild cold. "You Parker Judd?" the taller one asked. "That's right," I said, dropping the loppers. He nodded. "We're from the Department of Justice. Financial Crimes Division. We'd like to ask you a few questions about a recreational grant issued to Ridgeview Horizons 18 months ago." "They're already under state investigation," I said. "We're aware," he replied. "But the funds came from a federal rural development package. That makes it our problem too." I led them to the main house and poured coffee while they set up at the dining table. They were efficient, not rude, flipping through spreadsheets and maps with a kind of surgical calm. The shorter agent, Monroe, pulled out a printed email chain. "This was recovered from Elora Kensington's laptop during the state warrant search," he said. "It details a meeting between her, Councilwoman Gentry, and an individual named Silas Avery. You familiar with him?" "Silas runs a contracting outfit out of Mason County," I said. "Specializes in boutique lakefront builds. Always struck me as too polished for this area. He's also listed as a project lead on a proposal that would have dug a canal from your lake to a nearby development," Monroe added. "Except there's no record of a permit application. No environmental study. Nothing." I leaned back. "They were going to drain it." "Not entirely," the taller agent said. "Just enough to create access for a planned luxury cul-de-sac. 5 homes. Private water access. Paid for, in part, by the grant money." I stared at the ceiling for a moment. How close were they to breaking ground? Monroe set a flash drive on the table. "Drone footage shows preliminary land grading on a parcel adjacent to your western boundary. They were preparing to breach the ridge." "They never had access easement for that," I said. "That land belongs to the Holts. And the Holts don't sell." "Apparently they didn't need to," he said. "The documents were forged. Signatures too. That was the pivot point. The entire case had been about embezzlement and zoning fraud up to that point. But forging legal titles? That brought in a new level. Wire fraud was one thing. Conspiracy to commit land theft across state lines? That was interstate racketeering. 2 days later, a sealed indictment was filed in federal court. Elora, Gentry, and Silas Avery were all named, along with a 4th suspect, Brandon Carr, a junior analyst in the County Land Records Office. His role? Backdating and approving forged plats in exchange for consulting fees. The FBI executed 4 simultaneous arrests at dawn that Friday. I didn't see it happen, but word traveled fast. By noon, the local news vans were back, and the HOA's old office was boarded up with a federal notice taped across the door. That evening, I got a call from Jay Kim, who'd stayed on as part of the advisory committee. "Parker," he said, "the board voted to permanently dissolve the Oak Ridge Preserve HOA." "Good," I said. "That place was a breeding ground. There's something else. The county has asked you to serve as a liaison during the transition to a community land trust. They want someone with clean hands." I paused. "I'll think about it," No rush. Just know the neighborhood trusts you now. More than they ever did the board. I didn't answer right away. I was watching the lake from the porch, the wind brushing faint ripples across the surface. It looked whole again, undisturbed. A week passed. Then two. The federal case moved swiftly. Gentry folded almost immediately, offering a full confession in exchange for a lighter sentence. Silas Avery tried to run. They caught him in Arizona with 2 fake passports and a suitcase full of cash. Brandon Carr pled guilty after 20 minutes in interrogation. He hadn't even realized the scope of what he'd helped forge. Elora, however, fought it. She hired a high-profile defense attorney from the city and claimed she'd been manipulated by Gentry and Silas. Said she was just a face used to lure community trust. But the emails destroyed that argument. She'd orchestrated meetings, signed contracts, even negotiated with a private security firm to patrol the lake once the development broke ground. The trial lasted 4 days. Federal prosecutors were brutal. They brought in digital forensics experts, land surveyors, even a hydrologist who explained how the canal would have disrupted native fish migration. Every witness painted the same picture. Elora had leveraged her position in the HOA to stage a hostile takeover masked as community improvement. The jury returned guilty on all counts. She was sentenced to 6 years in federal prison, with no eligibility for parole. Her son Ryan didn't show up. After the sentencing, I received a certified letter from the new county clerk. Inside was a notarized statement correcting the land records and reaffirming the original private zoning for the lake and its surrounding acreage. The forged plats were officially voided. But that wasn't the end. Jay called again. The county commission wants to hold a public forum, he said. They're proposing new safeguards for all unincorporated land. They want you to speak. I agreed. Not for attention, not for credit, but because if someone didn't draw the line, it would just happen again under a different name. The forum was held in the high school gymnasium. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and folding chairs filled quickly. I stood at the podium and looked out at faces I'd known for decades: farmers, school teachers, welders, nurses, people who didn't have time to read zoning codes or budget ledgers, people who trusted the system until it turned on them. I'm not a politician, I said, and I'm not here to give a speech. I'm here because someone tried to take what didn't belong to them, and they almost got away with it because they counted on us not paying attention. I didn't speak long, just long enough. Afterwards, the commission passed a new ordinance requiring third-party audits for all HOAs operating within the county. They also stripped administrative access from elected officials with active familial ties to developers. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. I declined the liaison role. Instead, I nominated Jay, who accepted with the quiet dignity he always carried. Winter settled in. Snow dusted the ridge, and the lake froze in wide, clean sheets. I rebuilt the old dock, not for boats, but for sitting, watching, listening. One morning, I found a letter tucked into my mailbox. No return address. Inside was a single sentence handwritten in tight, careful print. I'm sorry for what she did. There was no signature, but I recognized the handwriting. Ryan Kensington's. It didn't change anything, but I left it pinned to the fridge. Some things deserve their place. As the months passed, life settled into its natural rhythm. No more board meetings. No more sudden reassessments or fake petitions. Just the land, the water, and the quiet honesty of work that doesn't require permission. They tried to steal it with ink and charm and signatures that didn't belong to them. But they forgot one thing. Some places aren't for sale, and some people don't scare.